So this video is about a recent family trip to northern Italy, the Dolomites to be more precise. Now, considering that my previous video had already been about a family vacation to Italy, one might get the impression that I'm just out and about traveling all the time, which I can assure you is not the case. I work a regular full-time job, and so my life is just as depressing and boring as everyone else's. But we just had these two trips lined up with just 2 weeks or 3 weeks in between them, and so that's just how it worked out. Anyway, originally I had no intentions to actually make a video out of this family trip because it was more sort of a spa/wellness type of vacation, meaning tons of good food, relaxation and all that, which is great. Doing nothing and being fed 3 or 4 times a day is exactly the kind of environment that I can thrive in, but I guess it doesn't exactly make for great content. And so that's why I decided to not have my camera out all of the time, but instead to just sort of enjoy the experience. The hotel we stayed at is called the Winkler, just in case anyone's curious. Lovely hotel, by the way, incredibly friendly staff, great food, fantastic spa area, and it's located, as I said, in the Dolomites, a beautiful mountainous region of northern Italy. Very different to what most people think of when they think about Italy though. If you ever had the pleasure to visit the Dolomites, you will know that it is one of the most beautiful regions that this planet has to offer, which I guess is kind of a good thing, but also a bit of a bad thing, because if you're not there currently, but you've been there previously, you will probably be depressed most of the time. Plus, in my case, I really don't think that the photos that I got while we were there really did it justice. But I'm getting ahead of myself. And so let's talk about what really matters first, which is camera gear. What camera gear did I bring on this trip? And well, probably rather unsurprisingly, I brought pretty much the exact same setup that I had brought for the other Italy trip that we did just 3 weeks prior. Meaning my companion little backpack, the Gen 3 in green and brown, stuffed to the brim with gear. Which was my Leica M11P, of course, along with my 28mm, 35mm, 50mm and 90mm Voigtlander lenses, my Canon V1 for some quick run and gun video shots, as well as my Sony ZV-E1 with the Tamron 20-40mm f2.8 and the 24-240mm for all my other video related needs. Aside from that, I also brought my beloved Oberwert Freiburg bag. Now, I got this guy for free by Oberwert a few months ago, and I've made a video about it already, but right now this is by far my favorite sling for camera bags. And my wife loves it too, which is saying something for a camera sling bag. I used the Oberwert to carry my Leica Q2, which is still the GOAT, and if I was using the Oberwert instead of the companion, I would also pack the Canon V1, a small tripod and my DJI Action 5 Pro in here, as well as some accessories. Now, as I said earlier, I wasn't really planning to make a video about this trip, and so I will not talk you through every little excruciating detail of this particular vacation, which I can only assume will be a huge disappointment to most of you. Instead, I will just take you on 1 or 2 little excursions that we went on while we were in the Dolomites. And the first place we went to was Lake Prax. It's a bit of an obvious location, I'll admit, but still very much worth it, at least at this time of the year, meaning in May. Because from what I've heard, at all other times of the year, the place is pretty much packed with tourists. Anyway, when we woke up that day, it was a regular morning at the hotel. You know, wake up, get ready, take the elevator downstairs, consume about 2,500 calories worth of breakfast over an hour or so, get in the car and head off. The drive took us about 35 minutes, and so we arrived at around 8:30 am, which, as it turned out, was just perfect timing, because right at the entrance point of Lake Prax is a little boat rental place, and since we were among the first people to arrive that day, we took our chance and decided to take this opportunity and get ourselves one of those boats. And if you ever actually decide to visit Lake Prax yourself, I advise you to do exactly the same. It costs $50, which is quite steep, I'll admit, for about an hour or so, but it is probably the best way to experience the beauty and the serenity that that lake has to offer. That is, of course, unless you're traveling with a 6-month-old, which is a bit of a different experience. Our little boy actually behaved pretty well for the first 20 minutes or so, but after that he was kind of fed up with just floating around on a boat, and he was not shy to let us, and in fact everyone else in the entire valley, know about that. Anyway, I did of course try to take a couple of photos of the place and of our boat ride with the M11P, but by the time that I took my camera out, Aaron was already throwing a bit of a temper tantrum, and so I gave up on photographing him and my wife pretty quickly and tried to get some POV style shots of the boat and the lake and the mountains in the background instead. And I have to say that at that moment I really wished that I had taken the Leica Q2 with me, which I didn't. I left it at the hotel, but using the M11P for those types of shots, especially with the 28mm lens, is a bit of a challenge because I didn't really have a lot of room, so I did have to get back as far as I could in order to get both the boat and the mountains in the frame. But that meant that I had to take the camera to my eye and use the rangefinder for focusing, which is usually something that I really like and enjoy. But with the 28mm lens, it's a bit of a challenge because the frame lines are so far on the outside of the OVF that it's sometimes a bit hard to make them out. And so really I was just sort of guessing where the frame lines actually are, and I think that played a huge role in why these shots for the most part really didn't turn out all too great. And so yeah, I would have loved to have the Q2 for that particular occasion, or maybe even better, the Sony a7 IV with the 24mm G master lens, which is a lens that gets used a ton for video purposes, but which I barely use for photography. But that's a topic for another video, I guess. Anyway, after trying our best to calm Aaron down, unsuccessfully of course, we threw in the towel and headed back to shore. As soon as we stepped back on land though, and put him into his little stroller, he went straight to sleep. And so we decided to go for a little wander around the lake. Beautiful little lake, incredibly crowded, full of tourists, as you would imagine, since it is very famous on Instagram. But yeah, the little guy is asleep now. Thank God for that. Now walking around that lake is a 10 out of 10 experience. Super relaxing, stunning views, what else could you want? However, once we had made it about 80% of the way around the lake, people that were coming from the other direction for some reason started complimenting us for how brave we were doing this little hike with a stroller. Mind you, up until that point, it was all smooth sailing, just walking along a gravel path. We eventually hit our first little challenge of sorts, which was the tiniest river crossing on the planet, but soon after that we realized what those people earlier were talking about, because the last 10 or 15% of the way was all just a giant ass stairway of doom going up and down the side of the stone wall which was facing the lake. Not a big deal, generally speaking, but for us it meant that we had to carry the stroller while also carrying Aaron and dodging people that were coming towards us at the same time. And so we fought our way up and down those stairs, occasionally throwing tourists down the side of the mountain when there was just not enough space. And our little boy apparently just hates us because I've never seen him smile as much as he was while we were huffing and puffing and struggling to get ourselves and him and the stroller up those stairs. And so I can only imagine that he was still sort of angry from the boat ride earlier that day, and that he was probably thinking something along the lines of, well, serves you right, idiots. But hey, gotta love the little guy for that. Anyway, a few minor heart attacks later, we eventually managed to get back down on the other side, and we were compensated for our troubles with a dopamine high and some more great views. And that was it for our Lake Prague's experience. If you've been following this channel for a while, you will know that my wife and I occasionally go to these very touristy destinations, and 90% of the time it really sucks to be there and we just regret our decision. But 10% of the time it's really just everything you hoped it would be. And our Lake Prague's experience certainly was in those 10%. With that being said, again, according to the staff at our hotel, it is actually possible to visit and enjoy Lake Prague's during April and May, but especially during the summer season, the place is just absolutely jam-packed. And yeah, so if you have the chance, try to get there. Probably in spring or late autumn perhaps might work as well. And I would also say that it's probably advisable to arrive as early as you can, because by the time we had made our way around the lake, there were just tons of tourist buses coming in, and yeah, it was getting a bit crowded. But anyway, we spent the rest of the day just lounging about, relaxing at the pool, and consuming copious amounts of food, as you do. Now, on the following day, fueled by our mildly adventurous experience out at Lake Prax, we decided to try our luck and go on a little hike in the Dolomites at Paso Giao, to be more precise, and I probably just butchered that name. Now, from what we could gather by looking at images on Google, it looked like there was a 10-kilometer hiking trail which should be accessible with a stroller, hopefully the entire way. And so we had some breakfast, got in the car, and once again went off. The drive dragged on a bit. It was a solid 1.5 hours actually, mostly due to some ridiculous speed limits along the route, which we didn't dare to ignore because there were cameras every 50 meters or so along the road. Scary stuff indeed. But hey, I guess the views sort of made up for it. Now I know what you're thinking. You're probably thinking, dude, going on a 1.5 hour drive on the off chance that there will be a full 10-kilometer hiking trail in the Alps that will be fully accessible with a stroller must be the most stupid thing that you've heard today. And all I can say to that really is, shut up, nobody likes a smart ass. But you wouldn't exactly be wrong though. First of all, the long drive meant, of course, that when we arrived at the parking lot at the top of Paso Giao, someone in the car had apparently shit himself, and all I can say is that it wasn't my wife. Aside from that, our baby boy Aaron, being the hungry hippo that he is, was already due for his third breakfast. And so I took the opportunity to take some photos of those stunning mountains. Sadly, by the time Aaron was fed, a crew of Porsche drivers and a gigantic tourist bus full of French people had arrived and clogged up the entire scene, as well as the only toilet available at the local cafe. Even worse though was that we would soon find out that there was absolutely no chance in hell for us to make it through even the first kilometer of that hiking trail with our stroller, and we had absolutely no idea what was waiting for us, even if we would be dumb enough to push through. And so we actually just went for a few hundred meters before we decided to throw in the towel and turn back in defeat. Now, we did consider for a little while to just use the baby sling that we have for Aaron instead, so that we didn't have to use the stroller, but our little boy usually gets really annoyed if he's in that baby sling for more than probably an hour or so, and so taking him on a 10-kilometer hike around the Alps was really not an option. And also, while it was pretty warm and summery down at our hotel, up in the Alps it was just slightly above freezing, and that's before you take those alpine winds into account. And so we were also really not prepared for that type of weather, including the stuff that we had brought for our little baby boy Aaron. And so again, we just made our way a few hundred meters up those rocky stairs, and I took a few photos with my M11P and the Voigtlander 50mm lens before eventually heading back to the car in defeat. And well, that was our experience hiking in the Dolomites. Not exactly the grand tale I envisioned it to be, but hey, that's just how life goes sometimes, especially if you have a baby. Truth be told though, we knew from the get-go that the entire plan was a bit naive, and so it was always on the menu for us that we might not be able to actually go on that hike, or that we might have to turn around at some point on that hike. And so, while we were obviously still disappointed to a degree, it really wasn't that big of a deal. With that being said, not gonna lie, we were of course still somewhat frustrated, but after mowing down a few French tourists with our car just out of pure spite and bitching and moaning a bit while we were making our way back down the mountain road, we eventually got our spirits back up and decided to make the best out of the situation. And so we spotted a gravel path that was leading along the road for a few kilometers to some small lakes, and so we decided to just park our car and follow that gravel road. Now, does walking along a gravel path 2 meters away from a busy road count as hiking in the Dolomites? Well, probably not. But did I at least get some good photos out of it? No, not really. I do like this shot here though. It's nothing special, but the composition is nicely weighted in my opinion. But mostly, I just like these shots of our baby boy Aaron smiling at us from the comfort of his little stroller. And I guess that is kind of the takeaway of this little outing. Sometimes it's really not about those epic views and honeypot location shots for your portfolio. Sometimes it's just about the memories we make along the way. Or whatever, I don't know, this is probably just the Cope talking. On our way back to the hotel then, we made a quick stop at a spot from which we were able to see the top of the so-called Three Peaks. And after that we headed back to our hotel for our regularly scheduled program of binge eating, floating around the pool and consuming copious amounts of Negronis, which helped to drown my disappointment. So, overall it was actually a great trip, but you know, it was mostly about the relaxation and the memories and the time together as a family, and not so much about the activities and the photography along the way. Even though I do have to say that, at least from my personal view, speaking as a father, I do think that I actually got a few really great shots, sort of family shots and memories, but also just a few shots more generally that I really actually like. And if you would like to see some more photos of this trip and indeed just other stuff that I'm up to, I've been a bit more active on Instagram recently, and so shameless plug, maybe consider just hopping over there and following me there too. So the overall takeaway is that I liked some of the photos, but at the same time I don't think that I really was able to do the whole region justice with the photography that I got. But still, at least I had a great time, because using that M11P is just always an enjoyable experience, and getting great photos at the end is just sort of the icing on the cake. You're having fun either way. And so I just love this camera, and I am very grateful that I got to use it just some more. But with all that being said, that is all I got for you today. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this was enjoyable to you, and I hope to see you in another video. Until then, take good care.